Okay, so this is our Safety Net podcast for mental health, and we are joined again by Dr. Nahid Dave and Mrs. Meghna Pradeep. Welcome back, guys. Always great to have you.
Yes.
So last time we spoke about the different types of problems that we could be facing, that different age groups could be facing in quarantine, in lockdown, with COVID, and I think it was a wonderful discussion. We also spoke about how the commonest mental health issues tend to be anxiety and depression, and people do need to start seeking help. There is a lot of stigma still associated with mental health and seeking help for mental health, but somewhere we do need to change, which is the whole idea behind this podcast in the first place, to have professionals and to show people that it's not that bad. There are normal people at the other end, and they're all here to help you. We are all here to help you. So today I wanted that to be the topic for our discussion today, is when exactly should people consider taking professional help? You guys have both been in practice for a long time now. Do people come late to you? Do people come early? At what point do they actually seek help? And what would you recommend? How early should they come to you?
Okay, so it's very unfortunate, but patients always come after a very, very long time. After they've tried and tested every possible thing under the sun, whatever their parents have told them, their friends have told them, reading motivational books and videos and yoga and meditation and all of that. And when nothing works, they're like, now no option, but I need to seek a mental health professional, and that's when they come. Very often we see that either people are having sleep disturbances, so when you're unable to sleep for a very long period of time, or you develop suicidal or escaping ideas, or you develop a panic attack or an acute symptom of excessive anxiety, or if you cannot control your emotions, if you're extremely impulsive, or you tend to have an anger outburst or a showdown which is affecting your life and the people close to you. Sometimes the patients themselves, or on insistence of others, they do come, but a lot of times it is after a lot of damage is already done. It is very unfortunate that this is happening. So related to our physical health, if you have a fever or if you have some physical symptoms, you would always go and check that, is everything okay? But that doesn't happen with mental health, obviously, because of the stigma and other things, that you want to wait and avoid it as much as possible, because if you walk in there, you'll be labeled as a patient.
Right.
So that is a very big problem. When they should come ideally is whenever you feel that, there are certain red flags. You should definitely go and seek help. So if you're having symptoms which last more than 15 days, if there are symptoms that you cannot distract yourself and feel better, so if you're having unrefreshing sleep, if you're having irritability, if you're having anger outbursts, if your interest has reduced, if you feel that your reactions are much louder than they used to be earlier, or if you feel you're thinking excessively about everything, every little thing is just going on in a loop in your head over and over again, it's probably a red flag and you must seek help.
Okay.
Right. So just to add to that, there are a couple of things I'd like to say in addition to what Dr. Nahid has said. One is that when to seek help is often a very individual choice. A lot of us have a tendency to test ourselves to the ultimate, to see how far we can go with the particular problem, to what extent we can go with a particular problem, and that's to an extent it happens with all of us. However, it's very important to remember that when your individual life is affected, your social life, your occupational life, your personal happiness, your ability to do your daily activities to the best of, as you have been doing in the past, if those things are affecting you, then it's time for you to seek help. It doesn't matter if your symptoms match a disorder. It doesn't matter if your symptoms are part of a bigger problem. It doesn't matter if they're mild. It doesn't matter if they're severe. If it affects you, it's time for you to take help. That's one thing.
Right.
The other thing is that there are a lot of myths that are associated with mental illness, which are deterrents to seeking help. So what Dr. Nahid spoke about were red flags. Red flags are essentially when we've reached that point of no return, in a sense, where you like, okay, now I have to do it, or now someone has to take me. It's almost a situation like that. But if you have to consider taking help before that, then there are certain things that you need to work around, which might be related to stigmas related to mental illness. So, couple of them are one, the prominent one is that you're crazy, you're totally out of whack. If you have to take mental health, means you must be.
Right.
It's almost associated with being in an institution.
Yeah.
So, whereas that is not.
The labels
not
that are
everybody who
attached.
seeks help is, and we use the term crazy for a lot of people who are art. We use the term crazy for anybody who's done something outrageous. It need not necessarily be related to only mental illness. The second thing is people think that you're weak. If you take help, means you've not been able to handle your problems. So there must be something wrong with you. So you're weak and you need to get stronger. So
tough love, so to speak.
It's almost like telling you that if you're so toughen up in a sense. However, opposite is also true. To actually take help takes courage. So you actually might not be weak. You might actually be strong enough to take it. So it's another way of looking at it, The other aspects are, of course, there is violence. People think that only people who are violent need mental health, whereas violence is not necessarily only associated with mental illness. It's a lot to do with your conditioning as well. Even though it can be a factor for mental illness, it's not almost synonymous with it, right? So there are a lot of myths that are associated. There are a couple of things in the sense that, if you have a mental illness, there's no going back. If you have it for life. You can never recover from it. You'll always keep having relapses. That is not the case for everybody. If you take help early, if you have a support system around you, if everything is falling into place, you may not have a relapse.
Right.
So there are a lot of factors associated to your recovery rate also, which are individual, which are related to the kind of help you're taking. Like Dr. Nahid spoke about, reading books, reading self-help books, motivational videos, talk to friends. A lot of these things can actually be deterrents to the way you have been coping, because in a way they are all, especially your social support systems, can be a very biased way of looking at things. They're very biased individuals, whereas a therapist or a doctor are unbiased people. They don't know you at all, so they won't hold any biases against you. So these are some of the things. Depends on when you take help. It depends on the quality of your help, and it's at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with prioritizing. The other thing is people think that it's very expensive. Only rich people can afford mental health.
Yeah.
Poor people can't afford mental health. Whereas if you go to a good doctor or a good therapist, they are often always willing to work around your issues, because there is an understanding that finances are a source of stress for a lot of people, and there are therapists and doctors who work around it. So it's not necessarily, it's not necessarily always about going to a person who has a fixed rate. There will be people who are willing to kind of work around your issue. So there are all these things. I think the counter to that is saying that mental health is expensive, is that in my experience I've also seen a lot of times where it's not really a priority for people. So you're okay going out on a lunch and spending 2,000 rupees on a lunch. You're okay to spend like 5,000 rupees on coloring your hair or something like that, but you won't spend the same kind of money for a therapeutic session or a psychiatric session.
Right.
So it's a lot to do with all these stigmas and all these kind of perceptions we have about mental illness, which can be deterrents to seeking help. So that's just
or not just deterrents to seeking help. I think also coming very late, like Nahid was saying, you end up coming at the point where you're going to need a lot of extensive therapy or probably medication, which we'll come to in a bit. Now, as far as seeking help for your mental health problems goes, the available help right now are like we had discussed once. We have helplines like we have at the Safety Net. I am listening at the safetynet.com .in. Apart from that, we essentially talk of either going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and we are very fortunate that we have a psychiatrist as Nahid, and we have a psychologist in Meghna. So maybe both of you could just elaborate what exactly does a psychiatrist do and what exactly does a psychologist do, so people can understand the scope of services of both these kind of professionals. Nahid?
Okay. Yeah. So a psychiatrist is basically a medical doctor, someone who's done their MBBS and their MD or diploma in psychiatry. and they practice their basic forte is related to understanding neurochemicals and neurobiology and how the different tracks in the brain work and how your mind is affected and how your mood goes up and down. So they understand the neurobiology of it. And the scope of treatment is obviously in understanding your needs, as in diagnosing you, understanding your symptoms, giving you a clinical diagnosis and treatment. So there are a few psychiatrists who do therapy as well. Or else, if you require medicines, you will be given medicines and referred to a therapist. And the therapist and the psychiatrist stay in touch with each other, so that
Right.
whenever they're working on a patient, so they can give the patient the best possible treatment that is available.
Right.
So
Right.
per se, psychiatrists do medications and sometimes counseling, and a psychologist will deal more with the therapy or the psychology part.
Right.
So a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a clinical psychologist is basically someone who has a background in psychology, in the sense that their bachelor's, their master's, their further studies have been related to psychology, and more often than not clinical or counseling psychology. These are the people who are equipped to deal with therapies. So in addition to therapies, of which there are several types, in addition to therapies, there are also assessments, where assessments are like you have a blood test, which is a standardized way of finding out whether there are certain issues. There are also standardized assessments in psychology, which help you determine the severity of your issues, the personality patterns maybe that may be associated with you, and your ways of behaving. So there are various kinds of standardized assessments which might be used by a psychologist if the therapist or the psychologist feels that you require to do that. So who is a therapist or a psychologist? Basically, it is a person, he or she is a person who is non-judgmental, unbiased, who is going to keep your information that you share with him or her confidential, private, and basically provides you a safe environment to discuss your problems. You might have gone to your friends, you might have gone to your family, you might have gone to your boss, your group colleagues, but they are all people who know you. They are never a neutral perspective.
Right.
So there is a sense of bias associated with them. And often with clients who come to therapy, they often feel like they are misunderstood. They often feel that people don't understand them. So a therapist is often that point of contact where you have the ability to discuss what you want to discuss freely and openly without being judged. What happens in therapy is basically it's a collaborative process of trying to figure out what is your best method and what is your what is the best way in which you can resolve your own problems. It's not a person who's giving you advice and telling you, what, do this, do that, and you'll be all right. It's basically a person trying to tell you that you have the ability to handle your problems. You're a bit stuck right now. With a little bit of guidance, with a little bit of understanding about how you function, you can figure out a way to manage your problems.
Right.
So the goal is for the therapist to make the client so independent in trying to resolve their issues that they don't need to be dependent on a therapist unless and until maybe something else has come up, or maybe they have experienced an exacerbated version of their problem again. So the underlying thing is to understand that you as a client have the ability to resolve your issues, but there are certain barriers that you might be facing right now, and therapy is a process of guiding you through those barriers.
Right. So one question that comes to my mind, like suppose I am somebody who's seeking help right now, I would be very confused as to whether I need to go to a psychiatrist or should I just approach a psychologist. So how should I choose? How should people choose who they have to go to, who they should approach first? Can you help us with that, Nahid?
So despite the work being distinctly different, both are very interdependent and they work in sync with each other. So it doesn't matter where you go. Okay, if it's not within their scope, you will always be referred to the other person. So if you go to a psychologist and the psychologist feels that you require medicine, you'll be referred to a psychiatrist and vice versa. So it doesn't really matter where you go, because understanding the scope of their treatment and what will be best for your needs, it requires a lot of work which you may not be equipped to understand. So start somewhere. Start with anything that you're comfortable with and you will find the right person.
Right. So you don't have to worry about it basically.
Yeah. Whatever point of contact you've chosen, whether it's a psychiatrist or a psychologist, depending on the interaction with this person, with this professional, the professional can then determine what kind of course of action you need.
Right.
So we'll guide you to the right. So
Right.
start somewhere, like she said.
Yeah,
like she
yeah.
said.
So the important thing is that when you see the red flags that we have mentioned earlier on in this discussion, seek help. Seek help right away. And you will find your way to the right kind of help. Your mental health professional will always guide you. Now, for somebody who's never been to therapy, what can you expect in a consult with a psychiatrist or in a therapy session with a psychologist? What should I expect if I go there?
Okay. So the first thing is that whenever a patient comes, they are firstly informed about their right to confidentiality. So whatever they share during the session is going to remain a secret. The psychiatrist is legally bound to keep it a secret, unless obviously the patient allows them to talk to somebody or wants them to reveal the data to somebody, a relative or friend, or if they develop suicidal ideas, self-harm ideas, or homicidal ideas of any kind, then you're allowed to breach confidentiality. If you're 18 plus, you can go to a psychiatrist without anyone with you also, without an accompanying person. Right. It always helps to have someone with you, a friend, a relative, or somebody, because it helps understand from a third person's point of view what could be the issues, because our opinion about ourselves may or may not be very objective. So that helps, but it's not a mandate that someone has to be there. After that, you describe them in detail about your current symptoms, what you're doing today, what has got you to this consult today, and then give them an overview of whatever has been milestones related to your mental health, which has been there since childhood, teenage, whatever you think is relevant that has happened in your life. If the psychiatrist feels that they want to know a certain part of your life in detail, they will ask for it, but the focus is more on the current issues. Depending on all the information that is received, you are given either a clinical diagnosis right away, or you may require to visit a few times before a clinical diagnosis is given. But the symptoms are enough to give a treatment. So either in the form of medication or counseling. So it's not necessary that if you go to a psychiatrist, you'll always be given a pill to eat. Sometimes only therapy or only counseling will suffice. If there are mild symptoms, you might just be referred to a psychologist for therapy. Or if the symptoms are moderate or severe, you might be given medications for some time and then probably counseling. This is how it works basically. And then you're given a follow-up date or time. And also you're explained the scope of the medicines, how much time they're going to take, what could be the possible side effects, what you should watch out for, what is not going to happen. You're not supposed to Google the medicines. That makes everything worse. These are basic things that you're told about before the consult ends. And that's how we go about it.
Right.
If required, we refer them to a psychologist right away.
Okay. Meghna?
Right. So it's very similar to what Dr. Nayak said, except that, of course, yes, there is a history. There is, in the first session, you kind of get an idea of the severity of the problem, whether this person needs a combination of therapy and medication, or whether it just requires therapy. Like I said before, everything that a therapist does is to basically provide you a safe environment so that you can talk about your problems. Sometimes it's good to have a person along with you who might be a parent or a friend or a colleague or someone, so that you also, other than kind of getting a third person perspective, sometimes your social system have factors that are what we call maintaining factors in your problems. You have been trying, but factors from outside have been kind of setting you back. So sometimes that also is a perspective that you get. Although it's, again, like you said, it's not entirely important for an informant to be present. But with therapy, essentially, as I'm sure with medications, but yes, it takes anywhere, I think, between a minimum of 6 weeks. It could go on to a few months, it could go on to a year. It very, very highly depends on at what point you have come with your illness.
Right.
If you've had a chronic illness, or if you've had an extremely acute illness where your reaction to an experience has been extremely acute, then it will take time. Chronic illnesses especially take a lot of time. And on the other hand, see, therapy is a collaborative process. You are as much a participant as is the therapist in the process, So it's very important to know that you have to basically be as much a participant to see the results. So if you feel that within 6 weeks you're not seeing results, it's as simple as, if you don't take medications for your fever, then you're not going to see a result in your ability to function normally. So it's like complying to a medication, except that this is something that requires a little bit of long-term change, because you're trying to change your thoughts, your emotions. It's like saying that if I want to lose 10 kgs in 1 month, I could do it with pills, I could do it with something extremely drastic. But if I really want my changes to last, then it has to be a long-term behavioral change, and that often takes time. So it's basically a way to kind of tell you that you have to look at things differently, you have to experience them differently, and you have the coping capacity to do it.
Okay, so we spoke about certain myths and earlier on, that prevent people from seeking help, whether it's the labels that get attached to you, that you're crazy, you're weak, all sorts of name calling that happens, or the fact that therapy is only meant for the rich and famous, it's not meant for ordinary working class people like us, or it's very expensive, I don't want to fall into that trap, this is all a money making scam. Now, all these things are associated, which is not true, but there are a few misconceptions that I wanted to clear. There's one for Nahid and there's one for Meghna. For Nahid, as a psychiatrist, we spoke about medications that you do prescribe to patients, and this is a very major problem. Most people don't want medications. They feel that it's going to affect their working ability, it's going to make them sleep a lot, and it's just going to make them slower in general, and which is why either they don't want to take medicines or they just don't comply. They don't continue taking. They'll start it and then eventually they stop it without any recommendation for any doctor. So would you like to clarify that misconception for us?
Yeah, so this happens a lot, like to literally bargain.
Yeah.
They're telling me, don't give us medicine, we'll do whatever, don't give us medicine. It's not a matter of choice, if you're having a problem. So basically the neurochemicals in your brain, the serotonin begins to dysfunction. To correct it, like anything else, like the glasses I wear, if I need it, it's not a matter of choice. You can't do that. So it's a big problem, and this comes from all the misconceptions that we have. So people have this whole lot of idea that it's going to make me slower, it's going to affect my liver and kidney. Once I start, it will never stop. I'll be sleeping throughout the day. I will lose my job. It will affect my ability to function, listen, understand, and all my creativity will be lost. None of these things are true. Okay, the current medicines which are available are extremely rehabilitative, in the sense that you will be functioning better, your focus concentration is better, you are fresh throughout the day, you have a refreshing sleep, and it's possible that you are able to function even better than what you were. Now, I'm not saying that it's like a miracle pill and every time I give you, the first pill I give you is going to change life for you. It takes some time. It takes about at least 10 to 15 days for it to begin acting, one. Secondly, there are a lot of people who don't tolerate the medicines in the first go. So you have to keep changing until you find the perfect fit. This fits them correctly. And you have to be patient in that process. Also, there is a possibility that despite taking the medicines, you may not get 100% better. You'll be a 60-70% and probably have to work with counseling. All these things do exist, but it's not that all medicines are sleeping pills. In fact, we do not give sleeping pills because we believe that insomnia or having sleep disturbance is always secondary to some problem. So if you treat the primary reason why it's happening, you don't have to give a sleeping pill. Once your mind is calm, you'll get your natural sleep. So sleeping pills are avoided as much as possible so that you are more in control of your emotions and you're able to work through therapy and counseling. Yes, a lot of people feel a lot better in 15 days and they're like, now my life is sorted, and they stop the medicine. Or they decide I've been taking it for enough time, now I want to stop it. So that is the biggest problem. Wherein you have to understand that if you stop it just like that abruptly, the chances of having a relapse increase. So either you have to taper it gradually and stop, or take adequate amount of therapy so that when you develop the symptoms again, you have the coping skills to deal with your problems yourself. So that is extremely necessary.
Right, but first and foremost, do not stop your medication randomly because you have decided. Please consult your doctor. Please.
And that's literally true for even a viral infection.
Yes.
Because I know that so often you 15-day course and within 1 week you feel better. You are just like,
Yeah,
pursue here.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so yeah.
So
And often I think, I know Dr. Naik knows better, but often when you do have a relapse because you have kind of stopped your medications, you kind of stopped your therapy, you often feel like the effort that was put into therapy and psychiatric, medications were pointless. So it's almost like, something
yeah.
kind of built up to just becomes entirely flat because of that one experience.
Correct.
So I think the primary thing, is to remember that it's a collaborative process and you need to participate in it and comply.
Right. Speaking of collaborative process and speaking of compliance, for you, Meghna, one big problem that people tend to, one complaint that people tend to have as far as therapy goes is that it takes very long. You probably need at least 6 or 7 sessions before you start seeing a change in yourself because, like you said, you are working on yourself. It's never going to be easy. I can put myself on a diet plan, but by the time I see actual results for weight loss, it's going to take me 2-3 months at least. Similarly, this is also going to take time. And people keep thinking that maybe this is not working. This is not the right fit for me, Maybe this therapist is not right for me. Or they just don't want to comply anymore with the therapy, with the plan of therapy, and they give up. So how would you like to go about that?
See, it really depends on what kind of problem you come with to a therapist. So that's the primary thing. How acute it is, how chronic it is, how short term it is. Those are very important factors. The second is the willingness of the client to participate in the process and not say that, listen, I'm coming to you, I'm paying you, so you want to tell me what to do. I'll do it, and kind of let that be and put a minimalistic kind of effort in the whole process. So what's really important is that it's an equally collaborative process. The changes that you are trying to make are at your individual level. So the effort has to be 100% from both ends.
Correct.
So the total effort is actually 200%. It's not really 50-50. It's a 200% effort. So that's very important. Like I said earlier, therapies, yes, it does take some time because you're trying to bring in a long-term behavioral change. Having said that, there are some people who do come with very problem-based issues, and their focus is that this is my problem. I want to find a way to work around it and deal with it, and that's it. It could be to do anything to do with life transitions, adjust into a new place, adjust into a new community. It could be anything like that. So there are people who do not necessarily want to come with a view of taking long-term treatment, but want to keep it quite crisp, and that also works as long as both the people are on the same page. That's again the other thing. And why does it take long? Like I said before, it depends on the severity of your issues. The other thing is that the effort that you put in is not going to see immediate change if you magnify, if there is kind of a gap between the expectations and the effort. So the idea is to kind of measure small changes and not really look at I wanted to lose 5 kgs in a month. That's just an example. I wanted to lose 5 kgs in a month, but I have literally just started taking walks. So there is a gap in your expectations. So those kind of things that again have to be managed in a therapeutic session where the expectations are at the same level as your efforts are realistic.
Right.
Because there is only one way there is only a certain way in which you can actually make constant behavioral change. Having said that, sometimes it so happens that you're doing well in therapy and you're doing well, whether it means even taking medications or whatever, but there could be a life stressor that happens in between, or a life circumstance that happens in between that throws you off. So that again can take you back. So those are things that both the therapist as well as the client have to be open about. That yes, I was doing well. Like for example, even if you take the COVID scenario, there are people with OCDs, there are people with obsessions and compulsions who are having a really tough time in COVID, during this pandemic. So where they had probably made progress in therapy, they're now falling back on it.
True.
So that can also happen, but it's not something that is in your control, so you have to work around. So sometimes those kind of factors could lengthen the process of your therapy, and there has to be a certain sense of openness, and flexibility. I think what's very important, whether it be with a doctor or with a therapist, is that you have to be, as a client, extremely open about your queries, about your questions, about anything that you feel is not going your way, is not going positively for you. Oftentimes we have very, very kind of black and white views about professions. Like a doctor can be either very good or very bad.
Yeah.
A therapist can be very good or very bad. There is never a gray area. So you can either take something that the doctor is telling you extremely blindly and extremely kind of in a revering fashion, similarly with a therapist, or you could be like, you could just judge everything that they are saying and feel completely misunderstood. So there are both extremes. So I think there has to be a middle ground where you don't take something extremely, kind of bluntly, and you also don't misunderstand everything that a professional is trying to tell you. For example, if I am a therapist and I am, trying to tell a client that this person needs medication, but the person is resistant to medication, at some level, there has to be that openness that the sort of convincing is coming from a professional. It's not coming from a lay person who's telling you, you need medication. So it's coming from someone who's telling you that you will do better if it's a combination of these two things.
Right.
Similarly, for a psychologist, who's trying to tell a person that you need to take therapy also. So there has to be a sense of openness, I think, other than the collaborative part of it. And I think every client has a right to ask the therapist any kind of questions that they may have about their treatment process.
Right. Okay, so I think this has been a pretty good discussion for somebody who has never gone to therapy. I think it's given a good insight as to what they can expect when they go, how they can actually seek professional help. And something I wanted to end this discussion with is, if you had any positive experience as far as your clinical practice goes, that somebody, any patient experience that you had that really made you also believe a little more strongly in the power of seeking help for your mental health problems. Nahid?
Well, there is this one couple that I always remember. So they had come to me for couples therapy because, they had reached a point in their life where they felt that things are not working out. He was very tired with her anxious and paranoid behavior. She would keep checking, or she wasn't comfortable in her skin. And she was also frustrated with what she had become. This is not who she was. And they were constant bickering, fighting, and every fight would lead to all fights all over again. They're really struggling. So we usually do a psychometric test and try to understand their personalities and speak to them as well separately as individuals to understand what their struggles are. So I found that other than this relationship, overall the female had a lot of anxiety in her life. So everything else also related to her work, her family and everything else, there's a lot of anxiety in everything that happens. To the extent that it was an anxiety disorder, it was not just worrying or concern, it was a disorder. So I treated her for the anxiety. And as the anxiety went down, her paranoia disappeared. And she was more comfortable in her skin. She was able to sort her issues by herself. And suddenly there was no problem at all. So something which began with couples therapy with just anxiety management, their entire life turned around. So that was one very, distinctly, I distinctly remember this case because they didn't even require any intervention. So they're just their anxiety management therapy for her anxiety, and that was about it. Although it required a lot of convincing for her to take medicine, because in a couple setting, we tend to believe that the one who's taking medicines is wrong. And the whole pretext of coming to therapy, the couple is like, tell us who's right and who's wrong. Isn't she wrong or isn't he wrong? Which we don't do. But then that purpose is lost. So convince them that, it's not about who's right or wrong. She's suffering more here, so let's treat her. Luckily they agreed, and it really turned out to be good. And that is one I remember. And there was this another guy who was he was basically suffering with anger issues. So he came for anger management. He used to enter into a lot of incidents of road rage. He would just get out of his car and start beating up, or over little trivial things he would just overreact too much. So it's not just him, but even his family members and friends felt that he should seek help. So with a lot of reluctance he came and he's like, "Now everyone's telling me, so I'm here." do your thing. So so gradually he got comfortable and we got to talking. So I realized that his anger was just the tip of the iceberg. His actual problem was depression. So he was frustrated, irritable, angry, helpless, hopeless in everything else in his life. And it just came out, or the presenting complaint was anger outburst. So on treating the depression and therapy for depression, the anger was not a problem. And within 3-4 months, I think 5 months, his medicine stopped entirely. And even the therapy was off, and he's good to go. He's married, doing well now. In fact, he does, come once a year, once in 2 years, just to check up. This is what is happening. This is how I'm dealing with my things. And so that's like these two I've seen. It begin with something and end with something entirely different. So these two are something that I really remember.
Yeah, because sometimes you think there is a certain problem, like you said, like there was people probably thought he had a problem with his rage, and it turned out to be depression. But that could only be sorted after he came to you. He sought the right kind of help, and that's when he actually got a solution to his problem, and he's living a healthy and happy life today. And I think that is so important, and that should be the take-home message from today's podcast, at least. That, this is why there are professionals in this field. They are going to give you a diagnosis. They are going to put you on the right track, And it's always, like Meghna said, it's always a collaborative process. It's not, nobody's going to force you to do anything. Nobody's going to put medications and, make your mind do crazy things. That's not how it works. I do hope that this session with both of you has helped dispel a lot of myths and misconceptions related to mental health and seeking professional help for everybody's problems. And as usual, of course, I had a great time. Thank you so much for making time for us and doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Most welcome. See you again soon.
Thanks. Yes, see you again soon. See you again soon.